Hello, everybody. Welcome to Geneva Trade Week. My name is Deborah Charles, and I'm the managing editor at DevEx, the media platform for the global development community. And I'm honored to have been invited to moderate this session, Stop Funding Overfishing. As you can see, hashtag Stop Funding Overfishing. Check it out on Twitter and social media, and you'll see a lot about it. In 2015, world leaders recognized the damage that harmful subsidies caused to fish stocks and the marine environment when they adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. SDG Target 14.6 tasked governments with reaching a new agreement at the WTO to eliminate those harmful subsidies by 2020. So we only have a few months left for WTO members to fulfill that mandate. And science indicates that reforming harmful fisheries subsidies could be the single greatest action governments can take to combat overfishing. And as the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, millions of people are dependent on fisheries as a source of employment and income, as well as for nutrition and well-being. So this session will showcase views from nonprofit, non-governmental sector. These panelists are representatives of the 164 organizations from around the world that have signed on to the Stop Funding Overfishing policy statement in support of the WTO negotiations. And that number of supporters is growing every day. So we're going to hear from these advocates on how WTO members can take effective action to protect biodiversity by reaching a deal at the WTO to end harmful fisheries subsidies. Before I introduce our panelists, just a quick word to explain how we're going to go about this session. Basically, I think the benefit of all these virtual events is that we can have a lot more participation and we can hear what you want to know and what you want to hear. We can answer those questions. So that the question that the panelists will be talking about throughout the whole event is, why is an ambitious agreement to reform fisheries subsidies essential to ensure sustainable and healthy oceans? And we want you to, they'll answer that question and other questions that I have for them, but we'd like you to also participate and ask, whatever questions you may have, and we can, have a better discussion that way. We'll also have a polling question that we will share with the audience so that we can get your insights and hear what you're thinking about different issues. So that's basically the plan for this session and how it's gonna fall out. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. We first have Wakeo Hanaoka. He is the founder and CEO of Seafood Legacy. Wakeo founded Seafood Legacy in 2015 to build Japan-centric solutions for seafood sustainability by addressing the importance of domestic business-led initiatives to create a driving force for regulatory reforms. Our next panelist is Kirsten Forsberg, and she's the founder and director of Planeta Oceano, a Peruvian nonprofit organization empowering coastal communities in marine conservation through research, education, and sustainable development efforts. And Michelle Kurek is the Vice President of Ocean Policy for WWF, where she's been leading ocean policy work since 2013. And Michelle's also worked as an advisor on illegal fishing issues at the Food and Agriculture Organization. And unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Editrudith Lukanga, who was the founder and executive director of the Environmental Management and Economic Development Organization, is unable to join us today for unexpected circumstances. So we will miss her, but we will continue on with these three wonderful panelists. We had hoped to give you a video that you could see that Sir David Attenborough probably explains and lays the groundwork for the situation of what is at stake and of the need to ensure a sustainable and healthy ocean. But due to various bandwidth issues, we're just going to share that link with you and not play it so that you can watch it and it won't disrupt everyone's connection. So you'll find that in the on your screen in the chat section, I believe, and you can play that whenever you want. And also, if you have questions, just feel free to put those into the Q&A or the chat section, whichever you want. If you have a specific, especially if you want to direct it to a specific person, just note that in when you ask your question. So without further ado, let's get started. And Kirsten Forsberg happens to have some issues with her power, which went out. So she's working on batteries. So I'm don't think that I'm biased. I'm going to her first often throughout this event, just in case, to make sure we get her words before her power goes out. So Kirsten, let me give it to you. And why don't you just tell us just why is an ambitious agreement to reform fisheries subsidies essential to ensure sustainable and healthy oceans?
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you for your understanding regarding my power. I would like to explain a bit of my perspectives coming from working with fishing communities on the ground. So as you mentioned, I run a nonprofit called Planet Oceano. It started as a community grassroots project when I was actually 22 years old. So many years ago, I started this youth-led project that now grew into a nonprofit. And throughout the years, our connections with our beneficiaries have really made them our close partners and our close friends. And so being out at field with local fishermen really shows you what they deal with day to day, how they have to go further out to fish every day because they're finding less fish, how any sort of environmental impact influences them economically, socially, and to their communities, to their families, it's a wider thing. So something that I would really like to highlight today is moving forward. We're not just talking about subsidies. We're talking about not just environmental, sustainability. We're talking about much more, about livelihoods of the children that depend on this. We're talking about community income. So indeed, we do have to think that we want to reach target 14.6. But if we don't reach that target, we're going to be dragging all these other sustainable development goals with us. So coming from Peru has the most productive marine system in the world. And working with small-scale fisheries has really opened this eye. In Peru, we have over 67,000 small-scale fishers. These small-scale fishers have been historically underrepresented, marginalized in policy, in social economic development, in many types of decision-making. And what this has led to has been a severe threat for the industry. In the recent years, a recent paper just came out mentioning that that fisheries, small-scale fisheries, have been increasing over the years. However, that has also related to less catch. So the catch per unit of effort in the Peruvian small-scale fishing fleet is decreasing. And there's a huge need to invest in many things, including enforcement, including maybe developing sustainable livelihoods, alternative livelihoods for fishermen. So moving forward, if we're thinking about creating opportunities for these small-scale fisheries, we need to sort of reinvest what we are doing globally with the agenda. So my real concern moving forward is, what are we going to leave to these small-scale fishers, to their families, to the communities that depend on them? I really think that they need to be showcased and have a voice in these discussions, because they've been forgotten for a very long time.
Thank you. And it is important, right, to think of it as it's not just, it's this goal, we want to reach this, but it's really affecting people. And that's a good insight into the impact on people in your community where you're living. Thank you very much. Wakao, how about, can you give us your insight into this?
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is again Wakao Hanaoka. I am the founder and the CEO of Seafood Legacy, which is a sustainable seafood consulting organization based in Tokyo, Japan. Thank you very much for inviting me to such a special occasion. Japan is reported as the 5th largest fishery subsidizing political entities in the world, after China, the EU, USA, and the Republic of Korea. In addition to the SDGs 14.6, reduction and elimination of subsidies harmful to biodiversity is also a goal of the Aichi targets of the Convention on biological diversity, decided at COP10 in Aichi, Japan, 10 years ago. This year, 2020, is the target year for that as well, but I must say that it is still far from being achieved. So let me briefly introduce the fishery subsidy situation in Japan. About 2/3 of the fishery subsidies in Japan have been allocated for the capacity enhancing purpose, including maintenance of fishing port facilities, construction of fishing vessels, compensation for fisheries deficiencies, and fishing vessel fuel cost. As a result, underlying structural problems have been unsolved for decades. We see a continuous decreasing trend in both the fish population in the ocean around the nation and also the fishes population in the nation. One of the features of Japanese fisheries is its coastal small-scale family business dominance. The population shows a decrease in about 10,000 fishes per year every year. Currently, we have about 150,000 fishes. The average age of the fishes is over 65, and many of them do not have successors. So fishing village society and regional fisheries business have been both being on the obvious decline in many coastal areas in Japan. The fishing operation has been continued even though they find less and less fish in the oceans for the subsidies purpose. Many of those fishers, as well as the fisheries cooperatives that they belong to, are not be able to operate without subsidies. So I see these short-sighted subsidies have been one of the major fundamental causes of decreasing this decline in the fisheries in Japan. But a big change happened in December 2018. As a part of the Cabinet Office-led overarching regulatory reform actions, the Japanese fishery law was revised for the first time in our 70-year histories. Sustainable use of fisheries resources is now mentioned as a purpose of the revised law, while the original law established 70 years ago was purely for fishers to catch fish as much as possible without fighting with each other. The implementation of the revised law is starting within this year. In addition now, a catch documentation scheme with import control rules as IUU fishing measure is also in the process to be established by the government. Those multiple initiatives are starting. The new wave is growing now in Japan. I'm sure it takes some more time for Japan to make the actual good outcomes in the ocean and also in the global society. But already for now in the nation, more subsidies are expected to be allocated to ensuring sustainability, such as tightening stock assessment, fisheries resource management, strategic compensation for fishing effort reduction, digitalizing reports, and IUU fisheries prevention. Fisheries and seafood are at the root of Japanese culture and tradition. It's an important part of our identity as well. So as a major fishing nation and also as a major seafood consuming nation, by changing its attitude toward fishery resources and also ocean's nature, I hope Japan to become more a contributor to those global collaborative initiatives on achieving seafood sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you do. It always is a connection. You think Japan and fishing. It's so connected and so important in the society, I think. Thank you very much. And now let's move over to Michelle. If you could give us your thoughts, your opening comments here.
Thanks so much, Debbie. And you heard from Kirsten sort of at a local level and WCAO maybe at more of a national level. And from my perspective in WWF, I'd like to take more of a global perspective. As Debbie mentioned, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development anticipates an agreement eliminating harmful fisheries subsidies this year. And this ultimate outcome can only occur in one place, which is here at the WTO. But the political will to get it done also needs to come from the capitals of every WTO member, which has publicly committed to the SDGs and pledged to combat IUU fishing and reduce overcapacity in fisheries. But we know that marshaling that political will to get it done is really all that remains, since it's been 20 years since these talks have lingered. and all of the needed facts and impacts and background information have all been supplied. WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, has been there since the beginning, and we applaud those who have had the fortitude to stay the course and fight for our ocean. But in the meantime, we've all had to witness the concurrent decline in the health of the world's ocean, fueled in large part by these harmful fishing subsidies funding too many boats chasing too few fish. It's time. Failure to successfully deliver a strong agreement with effective accountability and transparency should not be seen as an acceptable outcome. Our ocean is rife with three very dangerous activities. First, overcapacity. There are about 3 million fishing vessels that are estimated to fish in marine waters, and there are just not enough fish for all of them. Second, the problem of overfishing. More than 80% of the world's fish stocks are overfished or at capacity. And finally, illegal fishing. Losses from illegal fishing are estimated at over $36 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars every year. And illegal fishing is also helped along by nearly $2 to $4 billion annually in subsidies. And although these numbers and the monetary amounts are so large as maybe to almost be incomprehensible, but the harm that they do shows up in very human and relatable ways. Declining catches that are too small to provide the family's dinner, safety risks that drive small boats, forced to compete with each other in excessive numbers, far out to sea, even in dangerous conditions, no fish to sell in the marketplace, no hope of healthy economic development if the fish run out. This has real human consequence. If there is hope that our oceans can return to health, we must eliminate the over $22 billion in harmful subsidies that are given out each year for bigger boats, more fuel, less taxes to be paid, or any of the other forms that facilitate overcapacity, contribute to the decline of productivity of the sector, and erode our ocean's health. These funds can be far more helpful to the small-scale fishers who are allegedly the main beneficiaries of subsidies, and fisheries more generally, if the money can be redirected into better fisheries management and more effective enforcement. That's real progress on the water. That's the change we want. And all of us stand to gain tens of billions in additional revenue if our fisheries can be managed better and help to recover. We should stop undermining sustainable fisheries and community livelihoods through these harmful payments. And we cannot expect disempowered, impoverished communities, especially those in the least developed countries, which are already challenged by the COVID-19 crisis, to be stewards of ocean resources unless they are supported and empowered with targeted technical assistance and capacity building. As we know, these negotiations are at the interface of trade, the environment, and development, and the continued health of our planet. We are very close to realizing the high ambition so many of us have hoped for and have worked for and need. And thanks to all of you for all of the effort that you have already given to achieving this. And here's looking forward to a successful conclusion and a harmful, subsidy-free future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All of you have given such a good overview of what we're seeing here. Maybe I could ask, I guess sorry, I was having a little echo back and forth. Always the joys of virtual events and the downsides of virtual events. I think you all laid the groundwork for some really interesting questions. So I'm ready to jump in, but before I do, I'd love to ask if the producers could put up the poll that we have. We wanted to ask the audience a question and then see what sorts of results we get and then talk about it. So you'll see a poll up on your screen. If you could at some point during our conversation break away a second while you're listening to these important things that people have to say and just answer the question for us, that'd be great, and we can get more of a sense of what you all are thinking. And I think, so back to the panel, I think you've all laid the groundwork really well, and as we're looking at this, I mean, there have been 2 decades of stop-start negotiations, and really it's October, and we have just a few months left. I know things have been delayed a bit because of COVID, but maybe can you all explain, and as promised, I'm going to start with Kirsten, but how can sustainable fisheries be achieved through an ambitious WTO agreement?
Thank you so much, Debbie. And I'm looking at the polls right now and thinking of my answer to this, and I don't want to influence what people have to say. But I think that, I think everything has been mentioned right now in terms of the harmful fisheries subsidies. And we know that across the globe, there is need to support fishers. There's a huge need to support fishers. It's the way in how we're supporting fishers and who we're supporting that matters ultimately. So for example, if we're talking about supporting small-scale fishers that are supported in my country that need some sort of support, but if you're talking about supporting fuel costs for huge international fishing fleets to go to areas beyond national jurisdiction in front of one of the countries that then will have some sort of environmental impact on that country as well. If you're talking about subsidies that are just enhancing the overexploitation of stocks that are already exploited or overexploited. We know that a third of the population of fish stocks in the world are already overexploited. I think it's really shifting the way things have been done. And as you mentioned, this would probably be the single most important thing that we could do. Kind of coming from my work with coastal communities, and we've done numerous participatory workshops addressing, threats to local environments and what the root causes are. Many times for us, in case of conservation efforts, for example, one of the root causes is we don't have funding to continue its sustainability. So many times funding is the core root cause of what we're doing. And if we shift that around, we could be talking that funding these unsustainable fishing practices could be the root cause of probably what's happening on our ocean right now. So moving forward, I think that this is really important, not just in terms of fisheries, but in terms of ocean health. We can't forget that the ocean is our planet's main life support system. We breathe thanks to the ocean. We have our climate that is regulated by our ocean. And every single element of our ocean is connected. All our oceans are connected. We're sharing one single ocean. So anything that we do to move forward sustainable fisheries will also ultimately impact our own health. And I think that especially at this point in time, this is something that we should all be really thinking about.
It's a really good point, yes. Wakao, what do you think? Is there, if you could, just pushing off on that and just going back to the initial, like how can we, like, what would you say, how can sustainable fisheries be achieved through an ambitious agreement?
Yes, thank you. I agree to Christine's point. And in addition to that, Japan seafood consumption, about 50% is from domestically caught seafood, and the rest of the 50% is through import. So, and I believe that the strong initiative of each key political entities are very important, but at the same time, because of those importing and domestic situation also, because the seafood is also very much global commodity, the outcome that what each political entities can make is very much limited. That's why global collaboration is more important than ever now, especially because of the partly because of the COVID-19. We see the separations. Yes, and also there has been a long effort in RFMOs, like fisheries management bodies and things like that. But but still, we don't see a great output or great outcome from those efforts. So that's why WTO, like trade elements approach is also, I think it's very important, especially at this time.
Thank you. I agree. Michelle, what do you think?
Well, I mean, being the last of the three of us, all I can say is I agree. I agree with everything that Kirsten and Wakao have raised, and I'll go back to maybe some of the points that we've heard already, and that is that there are three primary, let's say, targets that we need to really address if the elimination of harmful subsidies is going to lead us all to sustainable fisheries. And that is making sure that we get control of overcapacity, we get control of overfishing, and we stop subsidizing illegal actors. And I mean, we need to redirect those funds. As I mentioned a few moments ago, there's $22 billion in harmful subsidies that are continuing to be supplied every year to fuel these three problems. And it seems like in some ways, the easiest one should be agreeing that subsidies should not continue to flow to illegal actors. They're not helping any of us. They're certainly disadvantaging those who try to play by the rules. And I know that there has been a lot of discussion around how to try to operationalize that, how to try to make that able to be applied in a fair and consistent way. And I have spent probably at least 2/3 of my professional career as an attorney who prosecutes violators of these kinds of rules, both at a national level and internationally from my work at the FAO. And let me just say that there's lots of talk about this. We want to stop IUU. We want to stop, the activities that are stealing from all of us. There's a lot less action than there is talk. And those who are really committed, who are using this as a reason not to come to agreement on this point, look carefully at your own activities. Are you really doing what you can to help the world stop the bad guys? And my sense is that there is a lot more that could be done. Stop protecting them. They are not helping your economy, your communities, your people, your food security issues. You're helping a very, very small privileged group who have exploited these public resources that really belong to all of us for a very long time. And that should be one of the easier areas of agreement on this. Then we deal with overcapacity and overfishing. And the political will is absolutely essential in order to make some of these tough calls. I mean, we do need to have alternative livelihood capacity building. Clearly, there are just too many, especially in the small boat arena, there are just too many people who are chasing the fish that we have remaining. And if all of them are intent on having a profitable business, which any independent business certainly would be, there is just not enough to go around. And we have to protect what we have if we're going to enjoy this kind of healthy ocean in the future. And as Kirsten so rightly said, it is not just about the fish. It is about everything that the ocean gives us. The health of the ocean is like our lungs. It's what helps the planet keep going. It helps us with our air, our climate, and so many of the things that we don't want. We've all, I think, at various times been subject to the new extremes that we see in the weather that are attributable to climate change, which again is connected to the health of our oceans, our planet. So it's not just about helping a few. It's really about collectively helping everyone. And it is a lot of money. I mean, talking about the harmful fishery subsidies, that's $22 billion. That's a lot of money. But when you listen to what governments typically say, when you talk to them about better fisheries management, they often say, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough financial resources to help us do the things we know we should do, that we want to do. Well, there are pockets of money that you do have at your disposal that you can redirect. It is a national choice. It is a question of political will, looking in some ways a little bit further down the road at the longer term benefits that come to all of us when we manage our resources wisely. And you know,
can I just jump in real quick?
Yes, yes.
Sorry. If you could, there's so much on that to talk about, but if I could ask you about, specifically about what you're talking about, the illegal actors, and maybe, would you mind just muting when I ask, just so I don't hear my echo back? Sorry, I'm realizing that maybe that's the problem, that I'm hearing a double echo. Just, could you explain to us what illegal actors you're talking about, and are you seeing, is there a change? Are we seeing more or different types in recent years? And I'm not sure if either Wakao or Kirsten wanted to weigh in on that after you do.
Sure. Happy to. So I'll start with the last part first. Have we seen any changes in recent years with regard to illegal actors? We've seen at least some portion of the illegal actors be part of organized crime at a transnational level. Fisheries are often not well regulated. They are seen as weakly regulated, which provides opportunities for organized crime syndicates to make a lot of money, whether they are directly fishing, whether they are using fish as a way to launder illegal profits, whether they are using fishing as a way to move other products, firearms, drugs, human trafficking. Fishing has been related to all of those things. And it's not just in one part of the world. There are many, many parts of the world where these activities at a very well organized level take place. In thinking about maybe part of what your question, Debbie, was trying to understand maybe what comes under the umbrella of illegal activities. And I will say that there's been a lot of attention associated in the last, I don't know, maybe decade or so since the term IUU was first coined. And IUU stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated. And all of it matters. Illegal has been studied, I'd say, most closely. Unreported is a part of illegal, and unregulated is very difficult to get, I think, our hands around. But all three contribute to the problems that we see. And illegal fishing has been actually defined well by the UN Port State Measures Agreement. It's a binding instrument, and it's directly targeting IUU. It's looking at trying to collect information, to share information. It recognizes the cooperative and collaborative nature of how we need to find working solutions to this problem. But there has been a new attention given, but I think that government historically, and I mean any government, typically acts relatively slowly. So actually coming around to being able to effectively deal with some of these problems has not been as fast or maybe as effective as we would like to see. But this element of the harmful subsidies fueling illegal fishing is really the sweet spot, if you will, of where we can have the WTO act as far as global, consistent approach to this problem. This is the place, the only place. Yes, it's great if individual nations do it, but this is the place where, if you will, the rules of the game with regard to this for all players will be established. And that's why this agreement is so, so very important. And I'll stop there to let my colleagues have a chance to weigh in on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That you really put it well, and I appreciate that, because while I was asking what define an illegal actor, someone that was also a question from the audience, so not just me. Kirsten or Wakao, would you like to weigh in on this? I'll look at Kirsten. I see a look on your face. I think yes.
I was waiting for Wakao to step up.
No, please go ahead first.
No, thank you. I mean, for us, illegal fishing also is an issue on multiple fronts, right? And something that I'm really concerned about is, in addition to this illegal fishing, it's because it's, you know, IUU, like the unregulated, the unreported fishing, like that is extremely harmful as well, even though it might be legal, right? So I'm very much concerned at this moment, and there's a lot of conversation going as well in terms of areas beyond national jurisdiction of what's going on in our open ocean that is not being reported and that is not being regulated and that is very difficult to regulate. So I just want to give you a really kind of like brief story to the side. One thing that we have been working on in the past few years is working with coastal community members in northern Peru to value giant manta rays. So these iconic, huge, 7-meter wide species that were previously captured in Peru, now they are legally protected. And we've been working with coastal fishing communities to engage fishermen in community-led manta ecotourism, which is something that is very promising for the area. Something that was really a concern of mine is that recently we were working with Stanford University, and we've been researching this species as well. We placed some satellite tags to understand where the mantas were migrating to. And of course, the mantas aren't just in, you know, Peru's exclusive economic zone. They're migratory species. They don't know about geographical boundaries. And they're going outside of the EEZ. And that is precisely where, for example, right now, there's a huge fishing fleet in China. You must have seen that on the news, the huge fishing fleet that was in Galapagos. It's now in front of Peru. And so, of course, the Peruvian government, it has sent, you know, and spending, you know, resources to go and kind of like enforce and patrol this fishing fleet to make sure that it's not getting into the EEZ. But imagine any sort of fishing that is occurring in areas beyond national jurisdiction that is not reported, that is not regulated somehow. Imagine the impact that it can have on the local fishing, and even beyond local fishing, as we were mentioning, how it would, for example, impact this community-based ecotourism. So you're talking about impacts to many other ecosystem services, and I think that is something that we really need to open our eyes to.
I want to add also that the catch documentation and import control rule that Japan is preparing to establish this year, that I explained just now, is mainly for combating IUU fisheries from Japanese market point of view. As I said, half of the consumption in Japan is import. So importing IUU related product is harmful to domestic fisheries. So in order to save, or in order to have a fair field for the domestic fisheries, it's been important to make those rules. And also about China, China and Japan are like neighbors to each other. And we see there's a report saying that huge overfishing / IUU fishing for the flying squid, Japanese flying squid around the sea between Japan and China, or broader like Northwest Pacific oceans. Those squids are landed in Chinese port in China, an IUU product, but we, Japan, import a lot of squid product from China. So without knowing, Japanese as consumers is being involved to this IUU activity as a victim, which we don't want to be a part of it. So those elements are also I want to add to this discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think, as Kirsten said, fish don't know boundaries, but neither do consumers, who think they're probably eating something that their own fishing fleet has caught. So a question actually from the audience for you, Wakao, that you pointed out that Japan is one of the largest fishing nations, and we've talked about that, but it's also one of the largest subsidizers of fishing. How can we encourage the large fishing nations to reform subsidies to their industrial fleets?
In terms of the way of Japanese governmental subsidies, the way of using those subsidies are mainly for coastal small scale. So it's not so much for big scale like offshore fisheries. In fact, Japanese government has been using those subsidies to reduce large scale fishing vessels. So that's why yes, it's true that it's still one of the largest fishing nations, but the catch volume has been declining, like 1/3 of its peak, which is like 1980 or something, 80s or something like that. Yeah, so that is the situation. Yeah. Do I answer the question?
Yes. No, that's good. Thank you. And just I'm sort of mixing my questions in with the audience questions because it's probably more interesting too, to make sure that I'm asking questions that they want. But I'd like to go back to something that Michelle said, which was talking about overcapacity, and that's an issue. Like how can that be even handled? Like, what is the best solution for that? And is that, are we moving towards that?
Debbie, maybe I could start if that's okay.
Yes, that was for you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I should be starting. Okay, good. Okay. So when we look at these numbers and we see that when you look at the totality of what we have here, 3 million fishing vessels as far as marine fishing vessels, and that's not even counting inland things, but just looking at 3 million vessels going out of all sizes, motorized, non-motorized, that's a huge stress on fisheries populations. And while it certainly encourages, at least in theory, employment, it doesn't provide for those fishers who are constantly competing with each other to have a reasonable return on their effort, and to meet their capital costs of vessel construction, fuel, labor, all the things that go into running a successful business. There has to be some acknowledgement by governments, especially those who have really large small fleets. And there are a number of countries that have huge small fleets. And it's trying to understand what are additional ways that they can diversify in terms of other kinds of income producing activities, as well as better managing the fisheries. Because if you continue to have open access fisheries with an unlimited number of vessels, it's not going to be too long before at least some coastal fisheries in particular are fished out. They just cannot withstand the fishing pressure. And it's not like these are easy decisions for governments. Of course they're not. They're complicated. They're difficult. Everybody, I think, would acknowledge that. And it's part of trying to take a little longer term view, not just what can I do to have voters support my programs for the next election. It's thinking about if these people are starving, if their communities collapse. We've seen in Africa the desperation that drives people to, vacate these coastal communities and take these incredibly dangerous trips across the Mediterranean in search of a better life. I mean, part of that is because their traditional livelihoods, their traditional food sources, in some cases based on fish, have just become exhausted, that they cannot, continue to survive with the old ways. And part of that is, we know our population is growing as a planet. And in some countries, it's growing a lot faster than it is elsewhere. And those are realities.
And so in order to be able to feed everyone, to supply their basic nutritional needs, to have stable and secure food supplies, we need to come to grips with the limits of what we can produce. And whether that is fisheries, whether that is plant-based material, no matter what the food commodity is, there are limits. And sometimes I know that there have been clever programs where certain fish stocks have been pressured and their numbers begin to drop, the size of the fish available begin to drop. And so governments are clever and they issue incentives to try to have fishermen chase different species. And can we create new and tasty recipes to encourage people to buy those species? I mean, we haven't always been eating the same kinds of fish that we are now. And probably in the future, there will be others that are subject of new commercial fisheries. But at some point, the ocean ecosystem can't take it all. And so there needs to be, as I said, a diversification, a reduction. And this doesn't have to happen overnight. I mean, it needs to happen in a reasonable way. I mean, we're not advocating for positions that are going to, turn communities into even a worse situation than they are now. I mean, it has to be done thoughtfully and in a smart way. And that's part of the redirection of the subsidies. We can't just keep throwing the money at more and more small boats. Let's put more out there. Although, interestingly, the research shows that only 16% of the subsidies go to small-scale fishermen, and 84%, the vast majority, go to large-scale operators. So there's a lot to unpack in all of that, in that data at a national level, at a local level, what kind of additional programs. Kirsten was describing some like ecotourism programs that are promising in some places. There are different ways to do this. And if we don't look at them while we have the option, we are going to be forced into situations in very short time frames where we have to make choices that aren't going to be easy, and we haven't given it thought just because we've continued to try to support the old ways of doing business. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful and very comprehensive. I'm wondering, Kirsten, if you're looking at it from more of a local point of view, isn't that a tough sell? Like trying to get, how do you explain the need to change and overcapacity issues in the area and sort of explain to fishermen who rely on this that things need to be changed?
Thank you, Debbie. And yeah, as Michelle was mentioning, it's not something that's easy. Of course, every decision is difficult. The way that we work with fishermen is really focused on a participatory approach and on developing ownership. So we work a lot with local leaders. We talk to local leaders, we identify their needs, and based on that, we develop programs that will suit them better. So I think there needs to be more of a conversation. I'm really lucky to be able to participate in different platforms, both locally and more maybe like at a national level, and really based on my experience, I see that these two sometimes don't communicate between each other. So I think we need to really be more on the ground, talk to fishermen, see what they really need. But of course, there's always going to be, losses in some sort and gains in some other. We're always going to be sort of like offsetting. But this sort of offset, as Michelle was mentioning, has to be done in a very smart way, in a very intelligent way. Our organization is not a radical environmental organization. That's not our particular position. We really work on developing alternatives and moving forward. So I think that what needs to be done is a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of searching for creative and innovative options. I think that we're at a stage in time right now where creativity is key. And so for us, moving forward with fishermen, I think that's why our organization has been so successful in its own conservation efforts, because people are empowered from the very roots. And it's not about, I think that when we're talking about, eradicating these harmful fisheries subsidies, that's the word. It's the harmful. It's not that I don't think that we need to stop supporting fishing. We just need to be doing it in a way that is not harmful and that really supports the communities.
Thank you. And very good point to remember that, everyone is not wanting, all subsidies are not bad. There are some good subsidies, right? So, and I think that's an important thing that is often missed when we talk about subsidies. It's so good to think about. I'm slightly changing lanes here for Wakao, I guess. This is more of a question about distant water fishing, particularly from Asia and Europe, which and the distant water fishing that's powered by the harmful subsidies. How does that affect the livelihoods and food security of the countries where those fleets are fishing?
Yes, Japan has been considered for a long time as the leading nation for the overfishing for distance water. Yes, it's very much harmful to the nation who have those fishing ground, and neighboring nations, and this is not fair things. And the negative impact is eventually coming back to fishing nation, this time Japan, as well as consuming nation, mostly Japan this time also. Yeah, so that's why it's been taking time, but I've been working on this issue in Japan for over 15 years, and finally we see governmental decision making changing. So I've been very exciting to see these things happen in my own country, and want to keep contributing to make that to create actual outcomes for the oceans and also for the global societies. And also I want to add the domestic part. As I said, small-scale fisheries, coastal fisheries, and the fisheries cooperative that they are belonging have been relying too much on subsidies for capacity enhancing subsidies. They cannot operate without subsidies. But at the same time, now government is making a big decision, big direction change decision. So the fisheries management will be tightened. So I think this is we have to be very strategic to how to use these subsidies, because if we suddenly put out all the subsidies from those local area, what they can do, I think they have no choice to do keep fishing maybe unreportedly, illegally. That's what we don't want to make the situation. So as both of you said, have to be very smart, very strategic. And for Japan, I think it's same in many other places. Success stories from other parts of the world, how to deal this situation has been, and it will be very much supporting. So again, global collaboration, it's been very important.
Yeah, thank you. I see a question from someone in the audience that actually is it sort of goes right into what we've been talking about, and I'll throw this open to whichever of you want to answer this. As it stands, the WTO does not make a difference between big and small boats, active and passive tools, etc. Major industrialized countries have also moved beyond direct subsidies, so not covered by a WTO agreement as it stands. Worse is that developing countries do not have special and differential treatment at the agreement. This means that developing countries cannot support and develop their fisheries. How then will a WTO agreement help small fishers? Who would like to grab that one?
I can point out two things there if you want. And coming from middle-income country myself and really working with fishermen, I completely agree with the fact that we do need this, special and differential treatment, and that kind of goes back to this flexibility and the creative thinking that I was talking about before in terms of how we're going to move forward. It's impossible for us to package everybody in just one sack and do like a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that is certainly one of the main complexities that this negotiations may have had also like throughout the past years. In addition, another complexity is that small-scale fisheries, there's no single definition for small-scale fisheries, and every country treats them differently. So, for example, and not even in every country, like even within locally. So one of the communities that I work with, you have these very small fishing boats that will go out, for one day, but then you have these larger trawlers, for example, which aren't huge, but they're still trawling or and all of them are considered small-scale fisheries. So I think there's a real need to kind of identify and define, and to be honest, moving forward, I think there's a lot of technicality that needs to be worked on within these negotiations, but also, and I don't want to sound extremely, soft in terms of soft skills, but there's a lot of things that we should be thinking of in terms of values, of empathy, of how we're going to really move forward with the shared ocean and resources that we have. So there needs to be a lot of a real strong ethical approach, I think, as well, in terms of defining these trees, in terms of understanding who we're going to give special treatment to, who not. So it's really important to assess country needs, but also be completely honest in terms of who we're supporting and who we're not. So we don't want, the bad guys or whatever to really take advantage of these special differential treatments, which shouldn't be the case.
Can I follow? Yeah, can I follow that? I think that the special and differentiated treatment is anticipated right from the beginning. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually mentioned in the SDG 14 itself with regard to subsidies. So it's not like they are that those principles are off the board. They're not, absolutely not. I think what the danger is, though, is that the way that some are envisioning them will create so many loopholes as to swallow up the good and the beneficial treatment that might be recognized from new provisions. And I think that that's a real danger. And so you have to be, I think, very cognizant of, yes, do you need flexibility? Yes, you do. Do you need to take account of unique situations in various places? Yes, of course you do, because not everybody's the same, and there are different ways to do many of these things. But again, it's trying to get at the harmful nature of the subsidies. And I know we've talked about this in the responses to other questions, but that's really the root of this problem. And yes, is the devil in the details? That's an old overused phrase. Is it still true? Yes, it is. At least I think so. I mean, because we're getting down into how do you define this, how do you define that? And it's not as though those things are bad, but if they are used as an excuse not to conclude a successful negotiation, after 20 years, we can't agree, we can't figure this out. Shame, that's terrible. I mean, in what place would you have that kind of luxury to talk and talk and talk for 20 years, not reach anything, and then still say, oh, okay, it's all right? No, it isn't all right. We really need to bring these negotiations to a high ambition, successful conclusion. And I completely agree with Kirsten. They need to be transparent. There needs to be accountability. We need to have data collected, so it's not shrouded in secrecy. It has to be able to be known. So if there are additional pressures that need to be brought to bear in certain locations, things to discuss, let's bring them out into the open. Let's talk about them. I mean, are many heads better than one in solving problems? You bet they are. There's always additional ideas and information that can be
found around the table. And those methods are really sort of the best way as a global community that we collectively can go ahead and try to deal with this real problem that probably started out with lots of good intentions. Let's be helpful. That was probably the original mantra, but it's escalated and grown into something that has turned into, at least at some level, it's harmful. And now we have to pull back, and we have to make course corrections. And I think that's maybe, without getting into lots of very intricate details on particular positions and terminology and things like that, that's kind of a good, maybe general way to summarize it. Thanks.
Thank you. Wakao, did you have anything to add on that one?
I think always very much well said. Nothing for me, I think.
Thank you. No, that was very well said. I think you both explained that so well. And a lot of these questions are coming from from our audience, which is great. But I just realized, let's go back. Let's take a second to go back to that poll that we put up early in our session, which the question was, why should we stop funding overfishing? And we gave 3 options. And I'm looking to see if I've sort of threw this on the producers, so let's see if they can give us the results. But here we go. That was pretty fast. So let's see, why should we stop funding overfishing? The top answer was the first one, which was to reverse the decline of fish stocks, and 45% of the audience said that was the biggest reason to stop funding overfishing. The next highest, with 35%, came from the second, to reduce poverty in communities who depend on fish for a living. And then, so those were the 2 main reasons that people saw. I'd love to see, Wakao, since I have you on my screen, what's your reaction to that? Why should we stop funding overfishing? Main reason, according to the audience, is to reverse the decline of fish stocks, followed by to reduce poverty in communities who depend on fish for a living.
Japanese tend to make it gray instead of clear black and white. And me being as a Japanese, I want to answer. I want to choose both A and B, and yes, and also the primary, the core of the issues are the same, and also the one solution cover both problem that I see.
Kirsten, do the responses surprise you at all, or sort of what you expect?
Yes, thank you. I mean, of course, and I guess that option A, to reverse the decline of these fish stocks would be the kind of like obvious, notorious first direct impact that we could have from this. But I really agree with somebody I think mentioned in the chat that they had marked other because they were considering that this could help with all of those, all of the above. And actually that was my kind of first thought when I saw the poll as well, because indeed we could have maybe the first quick direct impact to reverse this decline, but that can open the doors to so many other opportunities and other markets. And to give you an idea, for example, in Peru, there was a recent study that showed how through small-scale fisheries, markets and restaurants, all of that combined, could even produce more money and more income than fish meal and fish oil, which is huge in its industrial fishing fleet. So if we would really redirect and reinvest, giving added value to the fisheries that we can sustainably manage, that could lead to the growth. It could lead to, reduce poverty, leads also to reduce quality. So that's why I was mentioning that, this could lead to so many other SDGs to create so many other social impacts as well. Of course, those might be indirect and they may come later, but they will certainly be impacted by this decision of stop funding this overfishing.
Kirsten, we were having a little hard time hearing you, so it might be if you turn your video off, we might have a better way to hear, if that's okay, just next time. Not that I don't like looking at you, just so that we can hear what you're saying, because you're very valuable insights.
Oh no, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay, but it's actually much clearer this way, so if you don't mind, I'll, don't take it personally, but this way we get to actually hear what you have to say, so thank you. It's always like that, right? You never know what's happening with bandwidth.
No worries.
And did anyone else want to jump in on that one, on the responses to the polls, Michelle or Wakao?
Yeah, I'll take a moment just to add that I do think it's reasonable to interpret the answer A very literally, you know, as a direct connection, direct impact, and yet they're all interrelated. Are there many other causes of poverty? Yes, of course there are. Is this a big one in coastal communities? Yes, absolutely, it certainly is. And so I can certainly see how the split maybe was achieved by different people interpreting things differently. It doesn't mean any of the answers are wrong. I mean, they're not. They're all right. And are there even other outcomes, other negative impacts, even beyond the ones that are listed here? Both economic, environmental, social. Yes, there are. We talked about those in some of our other answers. Some of the negative impacts that basically sort of fishing our fisheries down to the point where they're no longer productive. The sorts of impacts that has. So it's great to, I think, sort of engage though on some of these points and to think about, in flipping it around, not only what are some of the negative impacts, but what are some of the benefits that would accrue when this successful negotiation has been concluded and we have a reduction, if not cessation, in distribution of harmful subsidies. So thinking about, how can we improve development in coastal communities? How can we help grow economies? I mean, in some ways, those are the things that they're framed in the positive, but I think really can also be great in terms of driving momentum and thinking about innovative ways that we can get support behind some of these positions. Thanks.
It's always hard to be the third person, so Wakao, you may not have any more additional reaction to these to the thoughts of the people who are listening to this, participating in this session, but anything from you before we move on?
No, sorry, again, no. I agree.
I know. It's and that's why I started it that way, because it's whenever I'm the third person asks something, I'm kind of like, really? Everyone already said everything. So another thing that is coming from an audience question is, someone said, developing countries that declare themselves at the WTO as developing countries account for 70% of catches. Would STD would that not entailing large carve-outs for them to be would that not be a major problem? I'm not sure if you have an answer on that one, Wakao, and I'm literally reading it, so perhaps I'm not explaining it well.
So, no, yeah, sorry, I don't get the question. I don't get the questions.
Michelle, did that one make sense to you? Because to be honest, I'm not an expert, so I'm not as good at this. If you have a
yeah, the way that I would interpolate that question is, small-scale fisheries are an incredibly important part of contributing to local and world trade in terms of their catch. And I mean, I think that's kind of the starting point. And then maybe the question is, then so how do we deal with that? Because we're talking about overcapacity, we're talking about overfishing. And I think basically maybe what the question is asking is, won't the negative impacts of reducing the numbers sort of fall most on sort of the small communities, and how do we kind of mitigate that risk?
and try to figure out how do we try to do something good without hurting, sort of the most vulnerable communities that are dependent upon fishing at the same time. I mean, that's how I would interpret it. And since I interpreted it, does that mean that I don't have to answer it?
I think if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Well, I feel like maybe with that explanation, it kind of opens the door maybe for Wakao and Kirsten to answer, since they're maybe closer to sort of some of the coastal community issues.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. So I think this is the challenge that Japanese government and Japanese coastal fisheries are facing at this moment. The governmental decision is already there, but how to implement without creating negative impact and make sure to make those coastal society more active, more happy. That's been that is the challenge, and that's the first time that the government and the coastal communities are facing. The nation.
Thank you. I do appreciate the interpretation too, Michelle. Kirsten, did you have anything you want to add, since I can't see if you're waving at me?
Thank you, and sorry about that. I hope you're hearing me better now. Are you hearing me better?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and I think that all that, builds upon what we've been talking about in how we need to have these, like special differential treatments, and how we need to think about things in a smart way, and how, of course, it's a complex and challenging situation. It's not easy. But something that I kind of mentioned it in my previous interpretation of the poll results is something I think we need to kind of like reinvest in adding value. So how can we add value to these small scale fisheries to make them, for example, more competitive, like in terms of their markets, in terms of their products? Is there any other way that we can support? So it's not necessarily in terms of supporting the overexploitation, but how can we make the most use out of the resources that we're already exploiting? How can we invest in social capital? How can we invest in further capacity building within the communities? What other types of services do these small fishers need? And that comes into like why you should talk to them. So I really think that there is a way. It is challenging, and by no means should we think about reducing support to small scale fishers. They need more support, more than ever. But it's how you support them and how you redirect these funds, which will ultimately generate benefits. Sorry, my cat is here. It will ultimately generate benefits to the fishers, but also to the greater markets that they are serving as well.
Maybe I can jump in with a couple thoughts, Debbie.
Yep.
So in looking at what kind of returns might be available if fisheries were managed better and we help them recover, the World Bank data showed $83 billion additional dollars in revenue could be available if we did a better job of managing our fisheries. Now, that's a huge figure. And when you think about trying to overlay it onto what Kirsten just said, and thinking about like reducing losses, because there's already in many coastal fisheries that are using certain types of gear and methodologies, high percentages of loss. So the fisherman is catching the fish, but it never gets to be put to either a use of human consumption or any other use, because the fish is lost in terms of processing. And that could be that it's not subjected to appropriate temperature controls, or if it's dried or salted in the sun, it's left out too long, it's infested by pests. There's lots of different things that are not either complicated or difficult to achieve when we're thinking about how can we do better. So it's thinking about methods that are already available to us, it's thinking about investing in the sector, especially in the small scale sector, in ways that are designed to produce additional revenue for them, secure livelihoods, ensure food supplies without damaging the source of the income producing and the food sources overall. So you're not trying to get more fishermen out on the water, but you are trying to get them to fish better, to fish smarter, to do better with what they have, perhaps use better gear, investments in low-cost technology. I mean, we haven't even talked about some of those kinds of possibilities. And traditionally, the small-scale sector is underinvested in. They aren't typically the subject of a lot of government programs. Innovators who are utilizing technology are not usually thinking about piloting some of their new ideas in some of these smaller communities, and yet that they are so ripe with potential. Whether it's for monitoring, getting a better handle on what the fishermen catch, so they themselves have data that they can take to a financial institution to show that they have a secure income to allow them to use their business as collateral for other kinds of investment. And whether it's purchasing a home, whether it's expanding into other businesses. I mean, there's so many positive and beneficial impacts that can be recognized from some pretty basic changes in how some of these programs are run. So there's lots that can be done, and hopefully it will be done. And this provides opportunities for those kinds of redirection of monies to explore how best some of that additional capital could be put to use for the benefit of some of these coastal communities.
Thank you. So not only interpreting, but answering, and I appreciate that. I think I'm just looking at the clock and realizing we're almost done. So I have this question that I'd like to pose to each of you, and I sort of feel like it's almost going to wrap things up and almost as an ending thought from everyone. But how can WTO member representatives be persuaded by NGOs, but also by their citizens and the general public? Is there a way that any of you on the panel can suggest that they can be persuaded? And I guess this is also my way of asking what is your call to action to the members who are negotiating? So we have maybe just if we can go for 2 minutes each person would be great. Let me start with Wakao.
Thank you.
I know you love it when I start with you.
I think, yes, as it's been said, to make fisheries more active, to make fisheries more sustainable, and to provide happiness, provide healthiness to the citizens in the world. More money is needed. It's good to have more money is needed, and where we can get those monies for using for good part is by eliminating those IUU related harmful fisheries related subsidies, I think. And as Michelle just now said, Japan also, those small scale, those coastal fishermen, they are showing interesting initiatives like digitalizing their report, using technology to make the fisheries more efficient, but also to monitor how much they catch and to report that to the authorities and things like that. So yes, to convincing, it's not saying that stop using this money, but only to stop using this money to better way, for better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kirsten, what would you say? How can WTO member representatives be persuaded? Is there a way that you can suggest, and do you have the final sort of call to action?
Thank you. Well, coming from a civil society organization, I think that citizens have a huge role to play. And with this Stop Funding Overfishing campaign, for example, and there's more and more NGOs involved, but we also need more people involved, more consumers involved, more citizens, more taxpayers. So I'm wondering if the taxpayers, for example, in some cases are aware that this is happening in their own countries, that they, through their tax funds, are also funding this sort of devastating exploitation. So I think that there's a lot to do in terms of consumer and citizen awareness as well. Moving forward, I think beyond the negotiations, there's a lot that needs to be done locally within the countries, within intersectoral collaboration. So the trade sector working together with the fishing sector, really bridging those gaps that many times aren't as strong within countries, and then bridging the gaps between government sectors, private sector, coastal communities, fishing communities, really, as mentioned, talking to each other more in order to develop solutions that will create a long-lasting impact. And ultimately, just to finish, I think there's a lot to be done in terms of biodiversity mainstreaming. So that's basically incorporating, a biodiversity approach within each of the decisions that they're taking. And so if we would all have this kind of like chip or mindset, I think that would certainly create a huge impact.
Thank you. Michelle.
Thank you. Just echoing what my fellow panelists have said, I do think that the general public, if they can't be expected to understand all the sort of esoteric ins and outs of all this. It needs to be put in sort of very human terms that can be relatable. But I do think that they assume that their governments take responsible positions to protect them, to protect their future, and to think about the collective health of the entire planet. And when I think about what can be done, sort of, I guess maybe my first request is to say to any negotiators who might be listening today, think about compromise as opposed to thinking about inflexibly defending a single position. For international negotiations, compromise and consensus building, as we all know, is the only way. And as messy and as inartful as it can be, that's the way to get it done. Maybe we can't answer every single question to everyone's 100% satisfaction. That is sometimes how it goes, at least today. But I don't think any of you want to have the label of a failure plastered on your back on December 31st, 2020, when we walk out without a successfully concluded agreement. Please, please do your absolute best. We are counting on you, and we have confidence in you that you can reach a successful conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think all three of you are so eloquent. There's no way I can even try to summarize that or say it even better. So maybe I will throw out that while we were talking, Prince Charles is adding his voice into this, and he issued a statement encouraging the WTO to conclude negotiations and in December this year. So everyone is kind of saying, you know what, let's get them done. And you're getting more weight, I think, asking, just making more people aware and getting the word out in simple terms like you would do to me, because I'm not an expert, and, getting more and more people to know. So there is, right now, as I mentioned, there are 164 organizations from around the world who've signed on to this single policy statement that calls for an ambitious outcome to the fisheries subsidies negotiation. That list is growing every day. You can find it at stopfundingoverfishing.com. And the number was increasing every time I looked at it on the way, before this event. So I just want to thank the audience for being so involved today. We had a lot of great questions. The panelists, you were wonderful and put up with me throwing things right and left at you that may or may not have made sense. And Kirsten, I'm excited that we made it all the way through without you losing power. So just a thank you to Wakao, Michelle, and Kirsten. and to the organizers. And just one last note is there will be a survey coming up on your screen afterwards. If you could fill it out, we would appreciate it. So thank you very much, and thanks for this great discussion.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you.
Bye.